Billionaire was ready to leave forever, until a call said his ex was alone in hospital with his sick baby. Before we begin, drop a comment telling us which city you're watching from, and once the story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Oh, and make sure to follow our channel for more stories like this. Now, sit back and enjoy every detail. The Seattle morning rain drummed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Dorian Blake's penthouse office, 37 floors above the city's bustling financial district. At 38, he commanded Blake International Logistics with the same precision he applied to everything else in his life. Calculated, efficient, and emotionally detached. Dorian stood with his back to his mahogany desk, his 6'2" frame impeccably dressed in a charcoal Armani suit that emphasized his broad shoulders and athletic build. His dark brown hair was perfectly styled, and his steel gray eyes reflected the overcast sky. Everything about him screamed success, power, and control. "Sir, the Singapore contracts are ready for your signature." His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "Leave them on my desk, Miranda. I'll handle them before my flight tomorrow." Dorian's fingers drummed against the glass as he watched the traffic below. In 18 hours, he would board a plane to Zurich and never look back. The Swiss office needed permanent leadership, and he needed distance. From Seattle, from memories, from the ghost of a marriage that had crumbled in his hands like sand. 8 months. It had been 8 months since Eliza walked out of their Bellevue home with their newborn son, Caleb, and never returned. 8 months since he'd signed the divorce papers without a fight, convincing himself it was what she wanted, what she deserved. His phone buzzed. A text from his real estate agent. "Penthouse sale finalized." "Congratulations, Mr. Blake." Dorian pocketed the device and moved to his desk, where a silver-framed photo sat face down among the contracts. He hadn't looked at it in weeks, but today felt different. With a steady hand, he lifted the frame. Eliza smiled back at him, her honey-blonde hair falling in soft waves past her shoulders, her green eyes bright with the kind of joy he hadn't seen in months before their divorce. She was wearing the pale yellow sundress from their second anniversary dinner, the one that made her look like sunshine itself. In the photo, her hand rested on her barely visible bump. Caleb, when he was just a flutter of hope between them. "Beautiful family," people used to say when they saw them together. Dorian would nod and smile, but inside he always felt like he was living someone else's life, someone who deserved happiness, someone who knew how to hold on to love without crushing it. Eliza had been everything he wasn't. Warm where he was cold, present where he was absent, hopeful where he had given up. She'd been a pediatric nutritionist at Seattle Children's Hospital, dedicated to healing others while he built walls around his own heart. She used to leave little notes in his briefcase, "Missing you already," or "Can't wait to hear about your day." He'd kept everyone, though he'd never told her. The intercom buzzed again. "Mr. Blake, your driver is here for the airport run-through." "Cancel it," Dorian said, his voice rougher than intended. "I'll drive myself tomorrow." He set the photo down and pulled out his laptop, opening his email. Buried among dozens of corporate messages was one from his lawyer, dated 3 weeks ago, with a subject line he'd been avoiding. Custody arrangement, time sensitive. Dorian had money, enough to buy countries, let alone custody battles. But what was the point? Caleb was better off with Eliza. She was the one who sang lullabies, who knew which cries meant hunger and which meant loneliness. Dorian had been present for exactly 17 days of his son's 8-month life, and even then, he'd spent most of those days checking emails and taking calls. Thunder rolled across the Seattle sky as Dorian closed the laptop without opening the email. Tomorrow, he'd be gone. Eliza and Caleb would build their life without his constant absence haunting the corners of their home. It was better this way. His phone rang, jolting him from his thoughts. The screen displayed an unknown local number. "Blake." "Mr. Blake, this is Dr. Sarah Chen from Seattle Children's Hospital. I'm calling about your son, Caleb, and your ex-wife, Eliza Moore." The world stopped. Dorian's hand tightened on the phone as the doctor's words cut through him like ice. "They're both here in our emergency department. Your son is very sick, Mr. Blake, and she asked me to call you. Would you abandon everything for the child you barely know, and the woman whose heart you broke?" Dorian's Porsche Taycan tore through the Seattle streets like a silver bullet, weaving between traffic with the kind of reckless precision that only desperation could fuel. His knuckles were white against the steering wheel, his jaw clenched so tight it ached. The windshield wipers fought against the relentless rain. but nothing could clear the fog of panic clouding his mind. "Your son is very sick, Mr. Blake." The doctor's words echoed in his head as he took a sharp right onto Madison Street, the tires squealing against the wet asphalt. 8 months. He'd had 8 months to be a father, and he'd wasted every single day convincing himself that distance was kindness. His phone, mounted on the dashboard, buzzed with an incoming call from Miranda. He ignored it. Then another from his attorney. Ignored. The Singapore client. Ignored. For the first time in his adult life, Dorian Blake was unreachable to the business world, and he didn't give a damn. The hospital's glass facade came into view, its windows glowing warm yellow against the gray afternoon. Dorian pulled into the emergency parking area, abandoning his car in a space marked "Physicians Only." The valet attendant started to protest, but one look at Dorian's face, wild with worry and determination, and the young man stepped back. The automatic doors of Seattle Children's Hospital whooshed open, and Dorian was hit with that unmistakable smell of antiseptic and fear that all hospitals carried. His Italian leather shoes clicked against the polished floor as he approached the reception desk, where a middle-aged nurse with kind eyes looked up expectantly. "I'm Dorian Blake. My son, Caleb Moore Blake. He was brought in. 3rd floor, pediatric emergency. Dr. Chen is expecting you," the nurse said, already reaching for her phone. "I'll let her know you're here." The elevator ride felt eternal. Dorian caught his reflection in the polished steel doors, his usually perfect hair disheveled from running his hands through it, his tie askew, his face pale beneath his naturally olive complexion. He looked like what he was, a man coming apart at the seams. The elevator dinged, and the doors opened to reveal a bustling pediatric ward. Nurses moved with quiet urgency between rooms, their soft-soled shoes silent against the linoleum. Dorian had been in countless boardrooms, had negotiated million-dollar deals without breaking a sweat, but this sterile hallway filled him with more terror than any corporate battlefield ever had. "Mr. Blake?" He turned to see a petite Asian woman in a white coat approaching, her expression professionally compassionate. "Dr. Sarah Chen," he assumed. Behind her, through the glass window of room 314, he could see a figure hunched in a chair beside a small hospital bed. Eliza. Even from this distance, even after 8 months of silence between them, Dorian's heart clenched at the sight of her. Her usually pristine honey-blonde hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she wore faded jeans and an oversized sweater that had seen better days. She was leaning forward, her hand extended toward the bed, whispering something he couldn't hear. "How is he?" Dorian's voice came out rougher than intended. "Caleb has a severe respiratory infection that's led to complications," Dr. Chen explained, her tone gentle but direct. "He's stable now, but we're monitoring him closely. The next 24 hours are critical." Dorian nodded, though he wasn't sure he was processing everything she said. His eyes were fixed on room 314, on the woman who used to share his bed, his dreams, his life. "She's been here for 6 hours, Dr. Chen continued. "Wouldn't eat, wouldn't rest, just waiting. She mentioned that you might be traveling. I was supposed to leave for Switzerland tomorrow, permanently." The words tasted bitter in his mouth now. Dr. Chen's expression softened further. "Children this young, they need both parents during times like this. The stress, the uncertainty, it's overwhelming for anyone to handle alone." Dorian's chest tightened. For 8 months, Eliza had been handling everything alone. Every sleepless night, every fever, every first smile he'd missed, she'd faced it all without him. "Can I see him?" "Of course." Room 314. "But Mr. Blake?" Dr. Chen touched his arm gently. "Be prepared. He's very small, and he looks fragile right now. But children are fighters. They're stronger than we think." Dorian approached the room like a man walking to his own judgment. Through the glass, he could see Caleb now, impossibly tiny in the hospital bed, connected to machines that beeped steadily. His son had dark hair like his own, but finer, softer. His skin was pale, almost translucent, and his little chest rose and fell with each monitored breath. Dorian's hand trembled as he reached for the door handle. Inside, Eliza's head lifted at the sound of his entrance. Their eyes met for the first time in 8 months, and the weight of everything unsaid, everything broken, everything lost, crashed over him like a tsunami. "Dorian," she whispered, her voice hoarse with exhaustion and tears. "You came." The simple statement nearly destroyed him. As if there had ever been a question. As if there was anywhere else in the world he would rather be than right here, right now, with the family he'd been too afraid to fight for. But before he could respond, The machines around Caleb's bed began to alarm, their steady beeping turning sharp and urgent. The alarm pierced through the room like a knife. Eliza shot up from her chair, her green eyes wide with terror as she reached for Caleb's tiny hand. Dorian froze in the doorway, his heart hammering against his ribs as nurses rushed past him into the room. "His oxygen levels are dropping," one of the nurses announced, adjusting the machines with practiced efficiency. Dr. Chen appeared beside Dorian, her calm authority a stark contrast to the chaos erupting around the small hospital bed. "It's okay, Doctor," Chen said, though her hands moved swiftly to check Caleb's vitals. "This can happen with respiratory infections. We just need to increase his oxygen support." Dorian watched, helpless, as the medical team worked around his son. Caleb looked impossibly small against the white hospital sheets, his little face scrunched in discomfort even in sleep. Dark lashes, Eliza's lashes, fluttered against his pale cheeks. Will he be okay? Dorian's voice cracked, betraying the composure he'd spent a lifetime perfecting. "We're adjusting his treatment now. The next few hours will tell us more," Dr. Chen replied, her tone professionally reassuring. "Why don't you both take a moment? There's a family consultation room just down the hall." Eliza shook her head immediately. "I'm not leaving him." "Eliza." Dorian stepped closer, his voice gentle. "You heard the doctor. They need space to work." She turned to look at him then, really look at him, and Dorian felt the full force of 8 months' worth of pain and exhaustion in her gaze. Her usually bright green eyes were rimmed with red, her face drawn with worry. She'd lost weight, he noticed. Too much weight. "I can't," she whispered. "I can't leave him alone again." The words hit Dorian like a physical blow. Again, like she'd left Caleb alone before, like he had. "You won't be leaving him alone," Dorian said quietly. "I'll stay. I'll watch him while you rest." Eliza's laugh was bitter, broken. "You'll stay? Like you stayed for his birth? Like you stayed for his first night home? Like you stayed for—" "Eliza, please." Dorian's voice was raw. "I know I failed you. I know I failed him. But I'm here now." The nurses finished their adjustments and the alarms quieted to their normal steady rhythm. Dr. Chen nodded approvingly at the monitors before addressing them both. "He's stabilized for now. Mrs. Moore, when was the last time you ate something?" "I'm fine," Eliza said automatically, her eyes never leaving Caleb. "You're not fine," Dorian said, stepping closer. "You're exhausted. When did this start? The fever?" "Yesterday morning," Eliza admitted reluctantly. "It came on so fast. One minute he was laughing at his toys and the next—" Her voice broke. "I've never been so scared in my life." "You called me," Dorian said softly. "After everything you called me." Eliza's composure finally cracked. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she wrapped her arms around herself. He needed his father. I didn't know what else to do. The admission hung between them like a bridge neither knew how to cross. Dr. Chen excused herself quietly, leaving them alone with their son and 8 months of unspoken truths. Dorian moved to the chair beside Eliza's, close enough to catch the familiar scent of her vanilla perfume mixed with hospital antiseptic and fear. "Tell me what happened. All of it." "Why?" Eliza's voice was barely a whisper. "So you can write another check and disappear again?" The accusation stung because it wasn't entirely unfair. Dorian had thrown money at problems his entire life. Business obstacles, legal issues, even his marriage. When things got complicated with Eliza, when her pregnancy made their relationship feel too real, too permanent, he'd worked longer hours, traveled more frequently, convinced himself that providing financially was enough. "No," he said finally, "because I want to know about my son, because I want to know how you've been managing all of this alone." Eliza was quiet for a long moment, her gaze fixed on Caleb's sleeping face. "He looks like you when he sleeps," she said eventually. Same stubborn set to his jaw, same way of frowning like he's solving the world's problems in his dreams. Dorian felt something crack inside his chest. Does he know who I am? The question that had been haunting him for months finally escaped, and Eliza's sharp intake of breath told him she'd been expecting it. "I show him pictures," she said quietly. "I tell him stories about his daddy, who works very hard, who travels to important places. I never said you didn't want to be here, but that's what you think." Eliza turned to face him fully then, her green eyes blazing with 8 months of suppressed anger. "What am I supposed to think, Dorian? You signed those divorce papers so fast I wondered if you'd been waiting for an excuse to leave. You never called, never asked about him. Never. I called. Dorian interrupted, his voice rough. Every day for the first month. You never answered. You called my office line, Eliza shot back. Once, and when my assistant said I was with a patient, you never called back. I thought. Dorian ran his hands through his hair, messing it further. I thought you were better off without me. I thought I was doing the right thing by staying away. The right thing? Eliza's voice rose slightly. Then she caught herself, glancing at Caleb. The right thing would have been staying, fighting for us. Being here when your son took his first steps last month, or when he said mama for the first time, or when he got his first ear infection and cried for 3 days straight. Each milestone Dorian had missed felt like a knife to his heart. He took his first steps? In the grocery store. Aisle 7 between the cereal and the baby food. Tears started flowing again. I had no one to tell, no one to celebrate with. I took a video, but then I realized, who would I send it to? The machines continued their steady beeping, the only sound in the room as Dorian processed the weight of everything he'd lost. Not just Eliza, not just his marriage, but months of his son's life that he could never get back. I was afraid, he admitted finally. My father was never there. He chose work over family every single time, and I swore I'd be different. But when Caleb was born, when I held him for those few minutes before I had to leave for Singapore, I realized I didn't know how to be different. I only knew how to run. So you ran, Eliza said simply. So I ran, Dorian confirmed, and I've regretted it every single day since. Before Eliza could respond, Caleb stirred in his bed, making a soft whimpering sound that had her on her feet immediately. But it was Dorian who moved first, his hand instinctively reaching toward his son. Can I? He asked, his voice uncertain. Eliza hesitated, then nodded. Just be gentle. He's smaller than most babies his age because of the early birth complications. Dorian's large hand carefully covered Caleb's tiny fist, and the baby's fingers immediately wrapped around his father's thumb with surprising strength. The simple contact sent a shock through Dorian's entire system. This was his child, his blood, his responsibility that he'd abandoned. He's beautiful, Dorian whispered, his voice thick with emotion. He's perfect. He's strong, Eliza said, settling back into her chair. Stubborn like his parents. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, both watching Caleb sleep, both lost in their own thoughts. Then Eliza spoke again, her voice so quiet Dorian almost missed it. I kept your wedding ring. Dorian's head snapped up to look at her. What? In my jewelry box. I kept it. She met his eyes. I kept telling myself I'd return it eventually, but what? Eliza's phone buzzed on the bedside table, interrupting the moment. She glanced at the screen and her face went pale. What is it? Dorian asked. It's my mother, Eliza said, her voice tight with new worry. She's flying in from Portland. She thinks you won't be here when she arrives. The sound of determined heels clicking against the hospital floor announced Patricia Moore's arrival long before she appeared in the doorway of room 314. At 55, Eliza's mother was a force of nature, silver-haired, sharp-eyed, and armed with the kind of maternal fury that could level mountains. Eliza Marie, she said, her voice carrying the particular blend of relief and reproach that only mothers had mastered. She swept into the room like a hurricane in a navy blue pantsuit, her designer handbag clutched like a weapon. Her eyes swept over Caleb in his hospital bed, then landed on Eliza's exhausted face before finally settling on Dorian with the intensity of a laser-guided missile. Mrs. Moore, Dorian said, rising from his chair with the automatic politeness that had been drilled into him since childhood. Blake, her tone could have frozen lava. Still here, I see. How unexpected. Mom, please, Eliza said wearily. Not here. Not now. Patricia ignored her daughter's plea, her attention focused entirely on the man who had broken her child's heart. Funny how a medical emergency suddenly makes you available. Where were you 3 weeks ago when Caleb had his first real fever? Or last month when Eliza had to take him to urgent care alone because he wouldn't stop crying? I didn't know, Dorian said quietly. Oh, you didn't know. Patricia's laugh was sharp as broken glass. Because picking up a phone is such an impossible task for a billionaire. Because asking about your son's welfare requires what? A board meeting approval? Mom, stop, Eliza said more firmly, struggling to her feet. This isn't helping anyone. What's not helping? Patricia continued, her voice rising despite her daughter's protests. Is this man showing up now when Caleb is sick, acting like some kind of hero? Where was this concern when my daughter was crying herself to sleep every night? Where was this paternal instinct when she was juggling a newborn and a broken heart? Dorian absorbed each word like a physical blow, but he didn't retreat. He'd faced hostile takeovers and corporate sharks, but nothing had prepared him for the righteous fury of a protective grandmother. "You're right," he said simply. "You're absolutely right about everything." Patricia paused mid-tirade, clearly not expecting agreement. "Excuse me? I failed them both. I was a coward who ran instead of fighting for my family. I was selfish and absent, and everything Eliza deserved better than." Dorian's voice was steady, but his hands shook slightly as he looked at his sleeping son. "I can't undo the last 8 months. I can't take back the nights she cried alone or the milestones I missed. But I'm here now, and I'm not leaving. Oh, please." Patricia rolled her eyes. "How many times have we heard this song? I'm different now. I've changed. This time will be different. Men like you don't change, Blake. You just find new ways to disappoint. Men like me?" Dorian's composure cracked slightly. "Rich, powerful, emotionally unavailable." Patricia ticked off the traits on her perfectly manicured fingers. "Men who think money solves everything and feelings are inconveniences to be managed. My ex-husband was exactly like you." The comparison hit its mark. Dorian knew about Thomas More, the successful surgeon who'd traded his family for his career, leaving Patricia to raise Eliza alone. It was a pattern Dorian had unconsciously followed, despite swearing he'd be different. "Mom, that's enough," Eliza said, her voice sharp with exhaustion and stress. "Caleb needs quiet, and this isn't—" A soft cry from the hospital bed interrupted her. Caleb was stirring, his little face scrunched with discomfort. Both women moved toward him immediately, but it was Dorian who reached him first, his large hand gently stroking his son's dark hair. "Hey there, little man," Dorian murmured, his voice automatically softening. "It's okay. Daddy's here." Patricia's sharp intake of breath was audible. "Daddy? He is his father, Mom," Eliza said quietly, watching as Caleb's tiny fingers grasped for Dorian's hand. "Whatever else happened between us, that hasn't changed. Being a father is more than genetics, Eliza," Patricia said, but her voice had lost some of its edge as she watched the interaction. "It's showing up. It's being there when things get hard." "I know," Dorian said, not taking his eyes off Caleb. "And I wasn't. But I want to learn how to be." Dr. Chen chose that moment to enter the room, her tablet in hand and a small smile on her face. "Good news. Caleb's oxygen levels have stabilized and his fever is coming down. The antibiotics are working." The collective sigh of relief was palpable. Eliza sank back into her chair, the tension finally leaving her shoulders, while Patricia pressed a hand to her heart. "How much longer will he need to stay?" Eliza asked. "If he continues improving like this, probably another day or two for observation. But he's turned the corner." Dr. Chen glanced around the room, taking in the family dynamics with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen it all. "I'll leave you all to get some rest. Visiting hours end at 9, but we can make exceptions for parents." After the doctor left, an awkward silence settled over the room. Patricia was studying Dorian with new eyes, her maternal instincts warring with her protective impulses. "There's a hotel across the street," she said finally. "I have a reservation. Eliza, you should come with me, get a real shower, a proper meal." "I'm not leaving," Eliza said immediately. "The nurses can call if anything changes," Patricia pressed. "You've been here for over 12 hours. I need to be here," Eliza said firmly. "With my son. Our son," Dorian corrected quietly. "And she's right. Someone should stay." Patricia's eyebrows rose. "Someone? I'll stay," Dorian said. "Eliza needs rest. And I need this. I need to be here for him." "Absolutely not," Eliza said, standing up so quickly her chair scraped against the floor. "You can't just waltz in here and take over. You don't know his schedule, his needs, what he likes. Then teach me," Dorian said simply. "Please, let me learn." The plea in his voice stopped Eliza short. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something she'd never seen before in all their years together. Vulnerability, raw, honest need. "His favorite song is 'You Are My Sunshine,'" she said finally, "but only the first verse. If you sing the second verse, the one about taking the sunshine away, he gets upset." "Okay," Dorian nodded solemnly, as if she'd just shared state secrets. "He likes his blanket tucked around his left side more than his right, and if he wakes up crying, sometimes humming helps more than talking." "Left side, humming. Got it." Patricia watched this exchange with growing amazement. In 30 years of marriage, she'd never seen her ex-husband take notes about their daughter's preferences, let alone ask to learn them. "There's a cafeteria on the second floor," she said grudgingly. "They close at 8, but the vending machines have decent sandwiches." Dorian looked surprised by the concession. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet," Patricia warned. "I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing this because my daughter is about to collapse from exhaustion, and my grandson needs at least one parent who's functioning." "Understood." Eliza hesitated at the doorway, looking back at Caleb one more time. "If anything happens, anything at all, you call me immediately." "I will," Dorian promised. "And if he seems scared or uncomfortable, I'll call you," Dorian repeated gently. Patricia linked her arm through her daughter's. "Come on, sweetheart. Let the man prove whether he's worth the second chance you're obviously considering giving him." As they reached the door, Eliza turned back one final time. "Dorian?" "Yeah? The wedding ring I kept. It's because I never stopped hoping you'd come back." And with that bombshell, she was gone, leaving Dorian alone with his son and the weight of everything he'd almost lost forever. The pediatric ward settled into its nighttime rhythm as visiting hours ended. Soft lighting replaced the harsh fluorescence, and the constant chatter of daytime activity faded to whispered conversations between night shift nurses. Dorian found himself truly alone with his son for the first time in Caleb's 8-month life. He'd moved his chair closer to the bed, close enough to watch the steady rise and fall of Caleb's chest. The baby looked impossibly small against the white hospital sheets, his dark hair tousled from sleep, his tiny fist curled around the edge of his blanket. Dorian could see traces of himself in the shape of Caleb's nose, the set of his jaw, but everything else, the delicate features, the long eyelashes, the peaceful expression, was pure Eliza. The machines continued their reassuring beeps, a technological lullaby that had become oddly comforting. Dr. Chen had been right. Caleb was improving. His color was better, his breathing easier, but Dorian couldn't shake the terror that had gripped him when those alarms had gone off earlier. What if he'd been on that plane to Zurich? What if Eliza had faced this crisis alone, as she'd faced everything else for the past 8 months? His phone buzzed quietly. A text from Miranda. "Singapore client requesting urgent conference call. Shall I patch them through?" Dorian stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "Handle it. I'm unavailable indefinitely." Another buzz, this time from his attorney. "Zurich office needs timeline for your arrival. Legal docs require your signature. Postponed. Will advise." A third message, from his assistant director in Hong Kong. Dorian didn't even read it before switching his phone to silent and sliding it into his jacket pocket. For the first time in his adult life, the business world would have to wait. Caleb stirred, making a soft whimpering sound that immediately had Dorian leaning forward. The baby's eyes fluttered open, deep brown, like his father's, and for a moment, they simply looked at each other. Caleb didn't cry or fuss. He just studied this tall stranger with the serious expression of someone trying to solve a puzzle. "Hey there, little man," Dorian whispered, echoing the words he'd used earlier. "How are you feeling?" Caleb blinked slowly, his tiny hand flexing against the blanket. Dorian remembered Eliza's instructions and carefully adjusted the covering, tucking it more securely around Caleb's left side. The baby's expression seemed to relax slightly. "Your mama says you like music," Dorian continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "She taught me your favorite song." He felt ridiculous. A 38-year-old billionaire singing lullabies in a hospital room. But as he began the gentle melody of "You Are My Sunshine," Caleb's eyes widened with what looked like recognition. "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. You make me happy when skies are gray." Caleb's little mouth opened in what might have been a smile, and something inside Dorian's chest cracked open. This was his son, his child, 8 months of life, and Dorian was just now discovering that Caleb had expressions, preferences, a personality all his own. "You'll never know, dear, how much I love you." The word stuck in his throat. How could he sing about love when he'd been absent for most of Caleb's existence? When he'd chosen boardrooms over bedtime stories, international flights over first words? Caleb made a soft cooing sound as if encouraging him to continue. "Please don't take my sunshine away," Dorian finished, his voice rough with emotion. A gentle knock on the door interrupted the moment. Nurse Jennifer, a kind woman in her 50s who'd been checking on Caleb throughout the day, peered into the room. "Everything okay in here? I heard singing." "He seems to like it," Dorian said, feeling heat rise in his cheeks. "Babies love their parents' voices," Jennifer said, approaching the bed to check Caleb's monitors. It's one of the first things they recognize. Even fathers who haven't been around much. Babies have an instinctive connection. Her words were gentle, but Dorian caught the underlying message. The nursing staff had noticed his absence, his awkwardness with basic baby care, the way Eliza had handled everything alone. I've missed a lot, he admitted. The important thing is you're here now, Jennifer said, making notes on her tablet. And look at this little guy. His numbers are even better than they were an hour ago. Sometimes having both parents present makes all the difference. After she left, Dorian found himself studying Caleb more intently. The baby was awake but peaceful, occasionally making soft sounds that Dorian was learning to interpret. When Caleb's face scrunched up slightly, Dorian tried humming, another of Eliza's suggestions, and watched in amazement as his son's expression smoothed out again. I bet your mom tells you bedtime stories, Dorian said softly. I don't know any of those, but I could tell you about the places I've been. Would you like that? Caleb's gaze remained fixed on his father's face as if he was listening intently. There's a city called Singapore where the buildings touch the clouds, and the harbor lights up like stars at night. I was there when you were born, making deals that seemed so important at the time. Dorian's voice grew quieter. I thought I was building something for you, for your future, but I was really just running away from being your dad. The confession felt strange on his lips, admitting his failures to an 8-month-old who couldn't judge him, couldn't walk away, couldn't sign divorce papers. But somehow, talking to Caleb felt like the most honest conversation he'd had in years. And there's a place called Zurich where I was supposed to move tomorrow, forever. I had it all planned out. New office, new life, new identity. I was going to pretend I never had a family to lose. Dorian reached out tentatively, letting his finger trace along Caleb's tiny hand. But then you got sick, and your mama called me, and I realized I was about to make the biggest mistake of my life. Again. Caleb's fingers suddenly closed around Dorian's thumb with surprising strength, and the simple contact sent a shock of pure love through Dorian's entire system. This was what he'd been running from. This overwhelming, terrifying, beautiful responsibility of loving someone more than his own life. I'm going to do better, he whispered. I'm going to learn how to be your dad. I'm going to earn back your mama's trust, even if it takes the rest of my life. And I'm never, ever going to choose anything over you again. As if in response to his promise, Caleb yawned widely, his eyelids growing heavy. Dorian continued humming softly, watching as his son drifted back to sleep, his tiny hand still gripping his father's thumb like an anchor. The night stretched ahead, long, quiet hours with nothing but the sound of machines and his own thoughts. But for the first time in 8 months, Dorian wasn't planning his next business move or strategizing his next escape. He was exactly where he belonged, beside his son, learning the rhythm of his breathing, memorizing the peaceful expression on his sleeping face. At 2:47 a.m., Dorian's phone vibrated with a text from Eliza. How is he? Dorian typed back carefully, not wanting to disturb Caleb. Sleeping peacefully. Sang your song. I think he liked it. Did he eat? Came the immediate response. Nurse said he took his bottle well at midnight. Temperature normal. There was a long pause before the next message. Thank you for staying. Thank you for letting me. Another pause then. Get some sleep, Dorian. Tomorrow is going to be a long day. But Dorian didn't sleep. He sat in that uncomfortable hospital chair, holding his son's hand, and for the first time in years he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. At dawn, when the first shift nurses arrived and found him still awake, still watching over Caleb, something had fundamentally changed. The successful businessman who'd walked into that hospital the day before was gone, replaced by a man who finally understood what mattered most. And when Eliza arrived at 6 a.m. with coffee and dark circles under her eyes, she found Dorian gently changing Caleb's diaper, awkwardly, inexpertly but with infinite care, while singing softly under his breath. You came back, she said quietly from the doorway. Dorian looked up at her, his hair disheveled, his expensive shirt wrinkled, his eyes red with exhaustion but bright with something she hadn't seen in years. Hope. I never should have left. Eliza stood frozen in the doorway, watching the impossible scene before her. Dorian Blake, the man who had once considered a boardroom more important than a delivery room, was attempting to fasten the tiny snaps of Caleb's hospital gown with the concentrated focus of someone defusing a bomb. The corner keeps flipping up, he muttered, his large fingers struggling with the miniature fasteners. How do these things work? Caleb gurgled happily on the changing table, seemingly amused by his father's confusion. His color was remarkably better this morning, rosy cheeks replacing yesterday's frightening pallor, and his breathing was clear and steady. "You start from the bottom," Eliza said softly, stepping into the room. "It's easier that way." Dorian looked up, relief flooding his features. "I've been at this for 10 minutes. I think I'm failing Basic Fatherhood 101. "Everyone fails at first," Eliza said, setting her coffee on the bedside table. "I cried for an hour the first time I had to change him at home. Convinced myself I was doing everything wrong." She moved to help him, their hands accidentally brushing as they both reached for the same snap. The contact sent an unexpected jolt through both of them, familiar yet foreign after months of careful distance. "You stayed all night," Eliza observed, taking in his rumpled appearance. He woke up around 3, fussy. "I tried the humming thing you mentioned." Dorian's voice was hoarse with exhaustion, but there was something new in his expression, a quiet pride. It worked. He went right back to sleep. Eliza felt something shift inside her chest. For 8 months, she'd been the only one to comfort Caleb during his nighttime wake-ups, the only one to know his rhythms and needs. Seeing Dorian naturally slide into that role felt both wonderful and terrifying. The nurse said his fever broke completely around 4 a.m., Dorian continued, gently lifting Caleb from the changing table. "And he took both his bottles without any trouble." "You fed him?" The question came out sharper than Eliza intended. Dorian paused. Caleb cradled against his chest. "Jennifer showed me how." "Was that? Should I not have?" The uncertainty in his voice caught her off guard. This wasn't the confident businessman who had answers for everything. This was a man genuinely asking for permission to care for his own child. "No, it's good," Eliza said, her voice softening. "I just wasn't expecting for me to actually be helpful, for you to want to be." The honesty hung between them like a bridge neither knew how to cross. Dr. Chen's arrival provided a welcome interruption to the charged moment. "Good morning, family," the doctor said cheerfully, tablet in hand. "How's our patient today?" "Much better," Dorian answered immediately. "His breathing is easier, and he's been more alert." Dr. Chen raised an eyebrow at Dorian's detailed response but made notes on her tablet. "Excellent. Let me do a quick examination." As the doctor checked Caleb's chest with her stethoscope, the baby reached up to grab at the instrument, chattering happily. His playful demeanor was such a contrast to yesterday's listless exhaustion that Eliza felt tears prick her eyes. "His lungs sound clear," Dr. Chen announced. "Temperature normal. Oxygen levels perfect. I think we can start talking about discharge." "When?" Eliza asked immediately. "If he continues improving like this, possibly this afternoon. We'll want to monitor him for a few more hours, but he's responding beautifully to treatment." Relief flooded through both parents. Dorian sank into his chair, the tension he'd been carrying finally releasing. Eliza pressed her hands to her face, overwhelmed by the emotion of the past 24 hours. "I'll have the discharge coordinator come by around noon to discuss home care instructions," Dr. Chen continued. "In the meantime, keep doing whatever you're doing. He's clearly thriving with both his parents here." After the doctor left, silence settled over the room again. Caleb had fallen asleep in Dorian's arms, completely comfortable with his father's presence. Eliza watched them together, trying to reconcile this tender scene with her memories of Dorian's emotional distance. "I called my office this morning," Dorian said quietly, not looking up from Caleb's sleeping face. "Cancelled everything. The Zurich move, the Singapore project, all of it." Eliza's coffee cup paused halfway to her lips. "All of it? I'm staying in Seattle. Permanently." Dorian's voice was steady, but she could see the tension in his jaw. "I know it doesn't erase the past 8 months, but I want to be here. For him. For whatever this is between us." "Dorian, I know you don't trust me," he continued, finally meeting her eyes. "I know I have to earn that back, but I'm not the same man who walked out of that delivery room, holding him last night, watching him sleep, feeding him. I finally understand what I was so afraid of." "What were you afraid of?" Dorian was quiet for a long moment, his hand gently stroking Caleb's back. "Failing him the way my father failed me, being so focused on providing that I forgot to actually be present. But I realized something last night. I was so busy trying not to become my father that I became him anyway, just in a different way." Eliza set down her coffee, processing his words. She'd known about Dorian's complicated relationship with his late father, but he'd rarely spoken about it so openly. "What changed?" she asked softly. He grabbed my thumb around 2 a.m., Dorian said, a small smile playing at his lips. Such a simple thing, but he held on like he needed me there, like I mattered to him. His voice grew thick with emotion. I've closed billion-dollar deals, Eliza. I've built an empire from nothing, but nothing has ever felt as important as that moment. Before Eliza could respond, her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. How's Caleb? How are you? Is he still there? The question about Dorian hung unspoken but obvious. Eliza glanced at her ex-husband, who was now humming softly to their sleeping son. My mom wants to know if you're still here, she said. What do you want to tell her? The question was loaded with meaning. Was he staying for the discharge? For the day? For longer? I don't know, Eliza admitted. Yesterday I was ready to handle this crisis alone like I've handled everything else. But watching you with him last night, seeing how he responds to you. But? Dorian prompted gently. But I'm scared, she confessed. I'm scared of believing you've changed, only to have you disappear again when things get difficult. I'm scared of letting Caleb get attached to you if you're going to choose work over family the next time there's a crisis. Dorian nodded slowly, understanding the weight of her fears. What if I proved it to you? Not with words, but with actions. How? Let me take care of him today. After discharge, let me learn his routine, his needs. Let me be the one who gets up with him tonight if he's fussy. Dorian's voice was earnest, almost pleading. I know your apartment is small, and I know having me there would be awkward, but you want to stay at my place? Eliza's eyebrows shot up. On the couch, Dorian clarified quickly. I don't want to miss another night with him. I've already missed too many. Eliza studied his face, looking for any sign of the old Dorian, the one who made promises he couldn't keep, who prioritized everything above his family. But all she saw was exhaustion, sincerity, and something that looked like hope. One night, she said finally. Trial basis. Relief flooded Dorian's features. One night. And if your phone rings with some emergency, if you get that look in your eyes like you're calculating the cost of staying versus leaving, then you have every right to throw me out, Dorian finished. I understand. Caleb stirred in his father's arms, making soft, wakeful sounds. His eyes opened, focusing immediately on Dorian's face with what seemed like recognition. The trust in that innocent gaze made Eliza's chest tighten with emotion. Maybe, just maybe, they could find their way back to each other, one careful step at a time. Her phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't her mother. It was her supervisor at the hospital where she worked. Hope Caleb is feeling better. Don't worry about your shifts this week, we've got you covered. The reminder of her own responsibilities, her job, her patients, her life outside of this crisis, brought Eliza back to reality. Soon they'd leave this protective bubble of the hospital and return to the real world, where good intentions collided with daily pressures and old patterns. There's something else we need to talk about, she said quietly. What? I go back to work on Monday. I can't afford to take more time off, and I have patients who depend on me. She met his eyes steadily. If you're serious about being present, about sharing the responsibility, then you need to understand that I can't be the only one juggling career and parenthood anymore. Dorian's expression grew serious as he absorbed the implications. You're right. I'll figure it out. Figure what out? How to be a hands-on father and still run my company. How to make this work for all of us. He looked down at Caleb, who was now wide awake and studying his parents with curious eyes. He's worth figuring it out for. The discharge coordinator's knock interrupted them, but as they prepared to take Caleb home, both parents felt the weight of the real test ahead. Hospital rooms were isolated bubbles where good intentions could flourish. The real world was where those intentions either survived or shattered under pressure. But for the first time in 8 months, they would face that challenge together. Eliza's apartment in Capitol Hill was nothing like the Bellevue mansion they'd once shared. The one-bedroom space was cramped but cozy, with mismatched furniture and baby gear occupying every available surface. Dorian stood in the doorway, holding Caleb's car seat, taking in the reality of how his ex-wife had been living. A playpen dominated the small living room, surrounded by colorful toys and board books. The dining table had been converted into a makeshift office space, with nursing nutrition journals stacked beside baby bottles and medical bills. Everything was clean but cluttered, functional but far from luxurious. It's not much, Eliza said, following his gaze around the space. But it's home. It's perfect, Dorian said, and he meant it. There was something warm and lived-in about the apartment that their designer showcase house had never possessed. This felt like a real home where a real family lived and loved and made memories. Caleb had slept through the car ride but was now stirring, making soft complaining sounds about being confined in his carrier. "He's probably hungry," Eliza said, moving automatically toward the kitchen. "His bottles are in the—" "Let me," Dorian interrupted gently. "You've been taking care of everything alone for months. Let me learn." Eliza hesitated, her maternal instincts warring with exhaustion. "The formula is in the cabinet above the sink. 2 scoops for 4 ounces and make sure the water isn't too hot." Dorian nodded seriously, as if she'd just explained quantum physics. He freed Caleb from his car seat, holding him against his chest while he navigated the unfamiliar kitchen. Caleb fussed slightly but settled when Dorian began the humming that had worked so well the night before. "The bottles are in the drying rack," Eliza called from the living room where she was sorting through the discharge papers from the hospital. Dorian found the bottles, measured the formula with scientific precision, and tested the temperature on his wrist just as he'd watched the nurses do. When he returned to the living room with the prepared bottle, he found Eliza curled up on the couch, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. "When's the last time you really slept?" he asked, settling into the armchair with Caleb. "I don't remember," she admitted. Between his fever, the hospital, worrying about missing work, as if summoned by her words, Eliza's phone rang. She glanced at the caller ID and sighed. "It's the hospital. I should take this." "Dr. Moore speaking," she answered, immediately shifting into professional mode. "Yes, I know about the Patterson case. No, the dietary restrictions should be—" "Wait. Slow down." Dorian watched as Eliza's face grew increasingly stressed. She grabbed a pen from the table, scribbling notes on the back of an envelope while trying to explain complex nutritional protocols to whoever was on the other end. "I can be there in an hour," she said finally. "Just don't change anything until I arrive." She hung up and immediately dialed another number. "Mom? It's me. I know I said I wouldn't need you today, but there's an emergency at work. A patient with severe allergies and the weekend staff doesn't know the modified protocol. Can you come watch Caleb?" Dorian felt something twist in his stomach as he listened to her conversation. This was Eliza's reality, juggling emergencies, dependent on her mother for childcare, carrying the full weight of both her career and motherhood alone. "Actually, never mind, Mom," Eliza said suddenly, her eyes meeting Dorian's. I think we have it covered." She hung up and looked at him uncertainly. "There's a patient crisis. A 6-year-old with multiple food allergies and the weekend staff is trying to implement a dietary plan they don't understand. I need to go in for a few hours." "Go," Dorian said immediately. "But you've never—" "I'll figure it out," he said, more confidently than he felt. "What time does he usually nap? What if he gets fussy? What—" "Dorian." Eliza's voice was gentle but firm. "If you're serious about this, about being his father, then this is what it looks like. Real life, sudden changes, no preparation time." She was right, and they both knew it. This wasn't just about one night on the couch. This was about proving he could be the partner she needed, the father Caleb deserved. "Tell me what I need to know," he said simply. For the next 10 minutes, Eliza gave him a crash course in Caleb's schedule. Bottle every 3 hours, nap time around 2. Favorite toys, emergency numbers, and the location of everything from diapers to baby Tylenol. "If anything goes wrong, anything at all, you call me immediately," she said, grabbing her keys and work badge. "I will. And if he won't stop crying, I'll call you. And if he seems sick or his breathing changes, Eliza." Dorian stood up, Caleb still contentedly drinking his bottle. "Go save your patient. We'll be fine." She kissed Caleb's forehead, hesitated for a moment as if she might kiss Dorian's cheek too, then seemed to think better of it. "I'll be back as soon as I can." And then she was gone, leaving Dorian alone in the apartment with his son and the weight of 8 months of missed opportunities pressing down on him. For the first hour, everything went smoothly. Caleb finished his bottle, played with a soft rattle, and seemed genuinely happy to be home. Dorian found himself relaxing, thinking that maybe this fatherhood thing wasn't as complicated as everyone made it seem. Then Caleb started crying, not the soft whimpering of hunger or discomfort, but the full-throated wails of a baby in distress. Dorian tried everything Eliza had suggested, rocking, humming, offering a pacifier, checking his diaper. Nothing worked. The crying escalated, and Dorian felt panic rising in his chest. What if something was wrong? What if Caleb was having a delayed reaction to his illness? What if Dorian was failing at the most basic requirement of fatherhood? His phone was in his hand, Eliza's number already dialed, when he forced himself to stop. She was saving another child's life. She couldn't come running every time he felt overwhelmed. "Okay, little man," he said aloud, his voice shaky. "Let's figure this out together." He walked around the apartment, bouncing Caleb gently, talking to him in low, soothing tones. He tried different positions, different songs, different approaches. Nothing seemed to help. Then, in desperation, he found himself in Eliza's bedroom, where he noticed a framed photo on the nightstand. It was from their wedding day, both of them laughing, completely unaware of the heartbreak that lay ahead. Next to it was a smaller frame containing Caleb's first hospital photo, the one taken when Dorian was halfway around the world. "Your mama kept our wedding picture," he told Caleb, whose cries had softened to exhausted whimpers. "Even after everything I put her through, she kept it right here where she could see it every night." Caleb's eyes, red from crying, fixed on his father's face with what seemed like attention. "She's an amazing woman, your mom," Dorian continued, settling into the rocking chair beside the bed. "Strong and smart and braver than I ever was. She held our family together while I was busy falling apart." The confession seemed to calm both father and son. Caleb's breathing evened out, his little fist curling around Dorian's shirt. "I almost lost her forever, you know," Dorian whispered. "Almost lost you both. I was so scared of being a bad father that I decided not to be a father at all. Pretty stupid, right?" Caleb made a soft sound, almost like agreement. "But I'm here now, and I'm going to learn how to do this right, starting with figuring out why you were so upset." As if in answer to his question, Caleb let out an enormous burp, followed immediately by a contented sigh. Dorian stared at him in amazement. "Gas bubbles," he said aloud. "You just needed to burp." He felt like he'd solved a complex mathematical equation. One small crisis successfully navigated, approximately 18 years to go. His phone buzzed with a text from Eliza. "How's everything? Sorry this is taking longer than expected." Dorian looked down at Caleb, now sleeping peacefully in his arms, and typed back, "We're good. Take your time. Your patient needs you. Are you sure? He can get fussy in the afternoons. We figured it out. He just needed to burp after his bottle." Crisis averted. There was a long pause before her response. "You're learning." "I'm trying." Another pause, then, "Thank you, Dorian, for being there, for letting me do my job without worrying. Thank you for trusting me with him." As the afternoon sun streamed through the apartment windows, Dorian settled deeper into the rocking chair, his son sleeping peacefully against his chest. For the first time, he wasn't thinking about business deals or strategic planning or the future. He was simply present, in this moment, with his child. When Eliza returned 3 hours later, she found them both asleep in the chair, Caleb's tiny hand clutching his father's shirt, Dorian's large hand protective across his son's back. She stood in the doorway for a long moment, her heart doing complicated things in her chest. This was the man she'd fallen in love with, not the successful businessman, but the vulnerable human being beneath all that armor, the man who could find peace in simple moments, who could be gentle and present and real. But as she watched them sleep, one question echoed in her mind. Would this version of Dorian survive when the real world came calling again? As if summoned by her thoughts, Dorian's phone began to ring on the coffee table, the display showing an international number and the word urgent flashing on the screen. The phone's shrill ring cut through the peaceful silence of the apartment like a sword. Dorian's eyes snapped open, his body immediately tensing as years of corporate conditioning kicked in, but Caleb was still sleeping against his chest, and moving too quickly would wake him. Eliza stood frozen in the doorway, watching as Dorian carefully shifted Caleb in his arms, reaching for the phone with his free hand. The international number glowed on the screen. Singapore, the client he'd abandoned at the airport yesterday. "Don't," Eliza said quietly. Dorian's finger hovered over the answer button. "It could be important." "It's always important," she replied, her voice carrying 8 months of bitter experience. "The question is, important to whom?" The phone stopped ringing. Silence returned to the apartment, but the tension remained thick in the air. Dorian looked down at his sleeping son, then back at Eliza, seeing the test for what it was. "You're right," he said, powering down the phone completely. "Whatever it is can wait." Relief flickered across Eliza's features, but it was tempered with wariness. One right choice didn't erase a pattern of wrong ones. "How did it go?" she asked, moving into the room properly and setting her purse down. "Rocky at first," Dorian admitted. "He had a meltdown around 2 o'clock. I thought I was going to have to call you, but then I realized he just needed to burp." "And you figured that out how?" "Trial and error, and talking to him." Dorian's voice grew softer. I told him about you, about how strong you are, how you held everything together while I was falling apart. Eliza's breath caught. Dorian, I found the wedding picture, he continued, on your nightstand. You kept it. The admission hung between them, loaded with meaning. Eliza moved to the couch, sitting down carefully so she could see both him and Caleb. I kept a lot of things, she said quietly. Your coffee mug, the book you were reading when I went into labor, the ultrasound photos you never looked at. Each item felt like a small knife to Dorian's heart, evidence of hope she'd maintained long after he'd given up on them. Why? He asked. Because I kept thinking you'd come back, that one day you'd remember what we had and fight for it. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I kept thinking maybe I hadn't tried hard enough, or maybe if I just waited a little longer. Eliza, no, none of this was your fault. Wasn't it? Her green eyes flashed with old pain. I was the one who asked for the divorce. I was the one who moved out. Maybe if I'd been more patient. You were drowning, Dorian said firmly. I was so wrapped up in my own fears that I didn't see you drowning until it was too late. You did what you had to do to survive. Caleb stirred in his arms, making soft, wakeful sounds. Eliza automatically moved to take him, but Dorian gently shook his head. I've got him. Rest for a minute. The simple offer, something that should have been routine between partners, brought tears to Eliza's eyes. For 8 months, she'd been the default parent for everything. Every feeding, every diaper change, every middle-of-the-night cry had been her responsibility alone. I'm scared, she admitted suddenly. Of what? Of believing this is real, of letting myself hope that you've actually changed. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. What happens the next time there's a crisis at work? Or when you have to travel for a big deal? What happens when being here stops feeling noble and starts feeling routine? Dorian understood her fear because he shared it. What happened when the initial guilt wore off and old patterns tried to reassert themselves? What happened when the business world demanded his attention and Caleb was just crying over a dirty diaper? I don't know, he said honestly. I can't promise I'll never make mistakes or that I'll always get the balance right, but I can promise that I'll never disappear again, that you'll never have to face anything alone. How can you promise that? Because losing you was the worst thing that ever happened to me, Dorian said simply, and I'm never going through that again. His phone, even though it was powered down, sat on the coffee table like an accusation. They both knew it would ring again. The Singapore client wouldn't just disappear, and neither would the dozens of other fires that required his attention. Show me his schedule, Dorian said suddenly. What? His daily routine, feeding times, nap schedule, everything. I want to learn it all. Eliza pulled out her phone and showed him the detailed notes she'd been keeping. Times, amounts, sleep patterns, developmental milestones. It was more comprehensive than most business reports Dorian had reviewed. You've been tracking everything, he said, amazed by the level of detail. I had to. When it's just you, you can't rely on memory or intuition. You have to know exactly when he last ate, how long he slept, when his last diaper change was. She scrolled through weeks of data. Pediatricians asked for specifics. As they went through the information together, Caleb began to fuss, making the pre-crying sounds they were both learning to recognize. Bottle time, Eliza said automatically, starting to get up. I'll get it, Dorian said, carefully transferring Caleb to her arms. 4 ounces, right? 2 scoops? Right. As Dorian moved around the kitchen, Eliza watched him with new eyes. His movements were more confident now, less tentative. He was learning, adapting, paying attention to details in a way he'd never done during their marriage. There's something else, she said, when he returned with the bottle. What? My lease is up next month. Dorian paused, bottle halfway to Caleb's mouth. What does that mean? It means I have to decide whether to renew here or find somewhere else. The implication was clear. If they were going to try to rebuild their family, practical decisions needed to be made. Where would they live? How would they handle custody? What did co-parenting look like when both parents wanted to be present? The house in Bellevue is still empty, Dorian said carefully. I never listed it, couldn't bring myself to. That house has too many bad memories. Then we find somewhere new, somewhere that's ours, all 3 of ours. The word ours hung in the air like a possibility neither of them dared fully embrace yet. Dorian, we can't just... Her sentence was interrupted by a loud knock on the door. They looked at each other, confused. Eliza wasn't expecting anyone, and it was too late for deliveries. I'll get it, Dorian said, handing the bottle back to Eliza. He opened the door to find a young man in an expensive suit, holding a briefcase and looking extremely uncomfortable. "Mr. Blake? I'm sorry to disturb you, sir. I'm James Chen from your Singapore office." Dorian's blood ran cold. "How did you find me here?" "Your assistant gave me the address, sir. We have a situation that requires your immediate attention. The Yamamoto deal is falling apart, and they're threatening to pull out entirely. They want to speak with you directly or they're walking away from the $300 million contract." From the living room, Eliza heard every word. She watched Dorian's face, looking for the telltale signs she knew so well, the way his jaw tightened when business called, the way his eyes went distant as he calculated costs and consequences. "Mr. Blake," the young man pressed, "the Yamamoto executives are already threatening to go with our competitors. If we lose this deal—" "I understand the implications," Dorian said tersely. "There's a red-eye flight to Singapore in 3 hours. I have your tickets right here." Eliza held her breath, waiting for the moment when Dorian would choose his empire over his family. Again, when he would promise to make it up to them, to be back as soon as possible, to make this the last time. But instead, Dorian did something that shocked them all. He closed the door, not slammed it, not shouted, just quietly, firmly closed it on $300 million and everything his old life represented. When he turned back to face Eliza, his expression was calm, resolved. "You didn't even think about it," she said, wonder in her voice. "Yes, I did," Dorian replied, moving back to sit beside her. "I thought about how many times I'd made that choice before, how many times I'd chosen money over moments, contracts over connection." He reached out to touch Caleb's tiny hand. "And I realized that all the money in the world isn't worth missing another day of his life." Outside, they could hear the young man making phone calls, probably reporting Dorian's refusal to his superiors. There would be consequences. The Yamamoto deal would likely collapse. His board would be furious. His reputation might suffer. But inside the apartment, as Dorian watched his son drink his bottle and his ex-wife look at him with something that might have been the beginning of trust, he knew he'd made the right choice. For the first time in his life, he'd chosen love over fear. The only question now was whether it was too late to matter. The morning brought chaos in the form of Dorian's phone, which had been ringing nonstop since 6 a.m. despite being set to silent. The vibrations against the coffee table were like an insistent drumbeat, each call a reminder of the professional earthquake he'd triggered the night before. Eliza emerged from her bedroom in scrubs, ready for her early shift, to find Dorian on the living room floor with Caleb, both of them surrounded by colorful plastic toys. Caleb was giggling, actually giggling, as Dorian made ridiculous faces and sound effects. "You're good at this," she said softly, pausing in the doorway. Dorian looked up, his hair disheveled and his expensive shirt from yesterday wrinkled beyond recognition. "He likes the helicopter noise," he said, making a whirring sound that sent Caleb into fresh peals of laughter. "When did he start laughing like that?" "About an hour ago. First time according to the baby book you have on the shelf." Dorian's eyes were bright with wonder. "Did you know he can almost sit up by himself now and he's been trying to grab everything?" His phone buzzed again, interrupting the moment. This time, however, it wasn't a call. It was a text from his board chairman. "Emergency meeting. 9 a.m. Your presence required immediately." Eliza saw his expression change as he read the message. "How bad is it?" "Bad," Dorian admitted, setting the phone aside. "The Yamamoto deal was worth more than just money. It was our entry into the Asian market for the next decade. Losing it?" He trailed off, watching Caleb reach for a soft block. "My board probably wants my head. Are you going?" The question hung between them, loaded with the weight of yesterday's choice. Dorian studied her face, looking for signs of what she wanted him to say. "I don't know," he said honestly. "Part of me thinks I should face the consequences of my decision. But part of me thinks that going would just prove that business still comes first. What do you think?" "I think," Dorian said slowly, "that I need to learn how to be present and responsible. Running away from my company isn't the answer any more than running away from my family was." Eliza nodded, understanding the complexity of his position. "What if I came with you?" "What?" "To the meeting. With Caleb." She moved to sit beside them on the floor. "If you're serious about integrating your life, about not compartmentalizing family and work, then maybe it's time your board met your son." Dorian stared at her, shocked by the suggestion. "Eliza, that's not how these things work. Board meetings are what? More important than acknowledging that you're a father?" Her voice carried a challenge. "If they want to understand why you made the choice you made, Maybe they need to see what you chose. The idea was terrifying and brilliant and completely unprecedented. Blake International board meetings were sterile affairs conducted in marble conference rooms with million-dollar views. The thought of bringing a baby, bringing his family, into that world seemed impossible. "They'll think I've lost my mind," he said. "Have you?" Dorian looked down at Caleb, who was now contentedly chewing on his own fingers, completely oblivious to the corporate drama swirling around him. 2 days ago, Dorian's answer would have been yes. Now, maybe, he said. But if I have, it's the best kind of crazy. An hour later, they stood outside the glass towers of Blake International, Caleb strapped to Dorian's chest in a carrier Eliza had hastily purchased from a nearby baby store. The sight of Seattle's most powerful businessman wearing a baby carrier while walking through the marble lobby turned heads and stopped conversations. "Sir?" The security guard's confusion was evident. Is everything all right?" "Everything's perfect, Marcus," Dorian replied, adjusting the carrier strap. "Is the board assembled?" "Yes, sir. 37th floor, conference room A." The elevator ride felt eternal. Eliza, dressed in her professional best after a quick wardrobe change, held Dorian's free hand while Caleb babbled happily against his father's chest. "Are you sure about this?" she asked quietly. "No," Dorian admitted, "but I'm sure about us, about him, about what matters." The elevator doors opened to reveal Miranda, Dorian's assistant, whose professional composure cracked completely at the sight of her boss with a baby. "Mr. Blake, sir, the board they're waiting." "I know," Dorian said calmly. "Miranda, I'd like you to meet my son, Caleb. And this is Eliza, Caleb's mother." Miranda's eyes widened as she processed the introduction. In 5 years of working for Dorian, she'd heard him mention his ex-wife exactly twice, and his son never. "He's beautiful," she managed. "He is," Dorian agreed. "Would you let the board know we'll be right in?" The conference room fell silent as Dorian entered with his unexpected entourage. 12 of Seattle's most influential business leaders sat around the polished mahogany table, their expressions ranging from confusion to outright shock. "Gentlemen," Dorian said, taking his seat at the head of the table with Caleb still strapped to his chest, "I believe you wanted to discuss the Yamamoto situation." Board Chairman Robert Sterling, a silver-haired man in his 70s, found his voice first. "Dorian, what in God's name is going on? You disappear for 2 days, abandon a $300 million deal, and now you show up to a board meeting with my family," Dorian finished. "My son, Caleb, and his mother, Eliza. This is highly irregular," another board member interjected. Blake International, Dorian said firmly, "is about to change how it operates. For too long, we've acted as if success means sacrificing everything else. I've been the worst example of that philosophy, and it cost me everything that actually mattered." Caleb chose that moment to make a happy gurgling sound, completely oblivious to the tension in the room. Several board members couldn't help but smile at the innocent interruption. "The Yamamoto deal is gone," Dorian continued. "I take full responsibility for that loss, but I'm not apologizing for the choice I made. My son was sick, my family needed me, and for the first time in my career, I put them first. At a cost of $300 million, Sterling pointed out coldly. "Money we can make back," Dorian replied. "Time with my son, moments with my family, those I can't recover once they're gone." The room was silent except for Caleb's soft baby sounds and the distant hum of the city below. Eliza watched as Dorian faced down some of the most powerful men in the Pacific Northwest, while their 8-month-old son played with his tie. "What exactly are you proposing?" Sterling asked finally. "A new model," Dorian said. "Blake International is a family-forward company. Flexible schedules, parental leave policies that actually support families, remote work options that acknowledge that our employees have lives outside these walls." "That's not how we do business," another board member protested. "Then maybe it's time we learned a better way," Dorian replied. "Companies like Google and Patagonia have proven that supporting work-life balance actually increases productivity and employee loyalty. We're losing good people because we demand they choose between career success and family happiness." As if to underscore his point, Caleb reached up and grabbed Dorian's tie, tugging on it with tiny fingers. Dorian's face softened immediately as he gently freed the fabric from his son's grasp. "This is what matters," he said quietly. "Not just to me, but to every parent who works for us. Every father who's missed his child's first steps because of a client dinner. Every mother who's chosen between a promotion and her family's needs. The board members exchanged glances, clearly struggling with this unprecedented situation. And if we refuse? Sterling asked. If we vote no confidence in your leadership? Dorian met his gaze steadily. Then you'll have my resignation, and I'll start my own company, one that proves business success and family values aren't mutually exclusive. The threat carried weight. Dorian Blake was Blake International's greatest asset, the driving force behind their expansion and success. Losing him would devastate the company's stock price and market position. You're asking us to revolutionize corporate culture because you've suddenly discovered fatherhood, Sterling said. I'm asking you to evolve, Dorian corrected, because the world is changing, and companies that don't adapt get left behind. Caleb had fallen asleep against his father's chest, lulled by the rhythm of his heartbeat and the warmth of being held. The sight of the powerful businessman cradling his sleeping child created a moment of unexpected tenderness in the sterile conference room. I need time to consider this, Sterling said finally. Take all the time you need, Dorian replied, carefully standing so as not to wake Caleb. But understand that my priorities have permanently shifted. Blake International can either shift with me or find new leadership. As they left the conference room, Eliza slipped her hand into Dorian's free one. That was either the bravest thing I've ever seen, she said quietly, or the most reckless. Maybe both, Dorian admitted. But I meant every word. They were waiting for the elevator when Miranda approached, her expression uncertain. Sir, there's been a development with the Yamamoto account. Dorian tensed, expecting more bad news. They called this morning, Miranda continued. Apparently they heard about your family situation. Mr. Yamamoto said he was impressed by a man who would choose his child over a contract. He wants to renegotiate. Dorian stared at her, speechless. It seems, Miranda said with a small smile, that sometimes doing the right thing pays off in unexpected ways. As the elevator doors closed on the three of them, Eliza looked at Dorian with something that looked very much like pride. So what now? She asked. Now, Dorian said, looking down at his sleeping son. We go home and figure out what our life looks like when we stop running from it. But even as he spoke the words, he couldn't shake the feeling that their biggest test was still ahead. 3 weeks later, Dorian stood in the empty nursery of their old Bellevue house, painting the walls a soft sage green, while Caleb watched from his bouncy seat, occasionally making approving gurgling sounds. The room that had once been a symbol of his failures was being transformed into something new, a space filled with hope instead of regret. The moving truck should be here in an hour, Eliza called from downstairs, her voice carrying up through the open door. They'd made the decision together, after careful consideration and long conversations that stretched late into the night, not to return to their old life, but to build something entirely new. The Bellevue house would become their family home again, but this time it would be different. This time Dorian wouldn't disappear into his home office for 12-hour stretches. This time family dinners would happen at the dining table, not delivered to conference rooms. The Blake International Board had voted after 2 weeks of heated debate to approve Dorian's revolutionary family-forward policies. The deciding factor had been the Yamamoto deal, which had indeed been renegotiated, for even better terms than the original contract. It seemed that Mr. Yamamoto respected a man who honored his family above all else, and wanted to do business with someone who shared his values. How's it looking up there? Eliza appeared in the doorway, wearing paint-splattered jeans and one of Dorian's old shirts. She'd been transforming the master bedroom, creating a space that felt like theirs instead of his. I think he approves, Dorian said, gesturing to Caleb, who was happily chewing on a teething ring. What do you think, little man? Ready to have your own room? Caleb responded with a delighted squeal, bouncing enthusiastically in his seat. He's been doing that all morning, Eliza said, moving to sit cross-legged on the floor beside her son. Dr. Chen says it's normal for babies his age to be more vocal, more engaged. Dr. Chen also said he's completely recovered from the respiratory infection, Dorian added, setting down his paintbrush. No lasting effects? Perfect lung function. They both fell quiet, remembering those terrifying hours in the hospital that had changed everything. The crisis that had nearly broken them had actually been the catalyst that brought them back together. I have something for you, Eliza said suddenly, reaching into her back pocket. She pulled out a small velvet box that Dorian recognized immediately. His wedding ring. I've been carrying it around for 3 weeks, she admitted. Ever since you stayed that first night, I kept thinking about when I should give it back to you, or if I should give it back at all. Dorian's throat tightened as he looked at the box. And what did you decide? That it's not mine to give back, she said softly. It's yours. It always was. The question is, whether you want to wear it again. The weight of the moment settled around them like a blanket. This wasn't just about a piece of jewelry. This was about commitment, about trust, about believing that they could be different this time. There's something I need to tell you first, Dorian said, his voice rough with emotion. Eliza's expression grew serious. What? I went to see someone, a therapist, Dr. Sarah Martinez. He sat down beside her on the floor, close enough that their knees touched. I wanted to understand why I ran, why I was so terrified of being a father that I sabotaged everything good in my life. Eliza's eyes widened. Dorian Blake, who had always solved problems through sheer force of will and business acumen, had sought professional help. What did you learn? That I was repeating my father's patterns without even realizing it, Dorian said. He was physically present but emotionally absent, and I was so afraid of being like him that I became exactly like him, just in a different way. I convinced myself that working constantly was noble, that providing financially was enough, but really I was just hiding. Hiding from what? From the possibility of failing you, from the responsibility of being someone's whole world. He reached out to touch Caleb's tiny hand. This little guy was going to depend on me completely, trust me absolutely, and I was terrified that I'd let him down the way my father let me down. Tears gathered in Eliza's eyes as she listened to him articulate fears she'd never fully understood during their marriage. So you left first, she said quietly. So I left first, he confirmed, before I could disappoint him, before I could prove that I wasn't worthy of his love. But you were worthy, Eliza whispered. You always were. I'm learning to believe that, Dorian said. Dr. Martinez is helping me understand that being a good father doesn't mean being perfect. It means showing up, being present, learning from mistakes. As if sensing the emotional weight of the conversation, Caleb reached out with both hands, making the grabbing motions that meant he wanted to be picked up. Dorian lifted him from the bouncy seat, settling him in his lap where Caleb immediately began playing with his father's shirt buttons. I love you, Dorian said suddenly, the words coming out in a rush. I love you both so much it terrifies me. For years I thought love was supposed to feel safe and controllable. But this, what I feel for you and Caleb, it's wild and overwhelming and completely beyond my ability to manage. And I finally understand that's exactly how it's supposed to be. Eliza's tears spilled over as she processed his confession. I love you too, she whispered. I never stopped loving you, even when I hated you, even when I was sure you were never coming back. I almost didn't, Dorian admitted. I was literally at the airport ready to disappear forever if you hadn't called. But I did call and you came, and I'm never leaving again. The promise hung between them, heavy with meaning. Caleb, oblivious to the momentous nature of the conversation, had discovered that Dorian's shirt pocket made a crinkling sound and was exploring it with intense concentration. So, Eliza said, holding out the ring box again, the question remains. Dorian looked at the box, then at his son, then at the woman who had given him a second chance he didn't deserve but desperately wanted. Will you marry me? He asked suddenly. Eliza blinked, startled. What? We're already married, technically. The divorce was never finalized. Too much paperwork, too many delays. Dorian's words came faster now, urgent with emotion. But I want to marry you again. Really marry you this time. With full understanding of what I'm promising. With Caleb there as our witness. With a commitment to put this family first always. Dorian, I want to promise you that I'll come home for dinner every night. That I'll never miss another milestone. That when you call, no matter what meeting I'm in, or what deal I'm negotiating, I'll answer. His voice broke slightly. I want to promise that our children, all of them, if we're blessed with more, will never wonder if their father loves them more than his work. Eliza was crying openly now, overwhelmed by the depth of his commitment. I want to promise, Dorian continued, that I'll spend the rest of my life proving that you and Caleb are the best decisions I ever made. That choosing love over fear was the moment my real life began. Yes, Eliza whispered, then louder. Yes, I'll marry you again. Dorian opened the ring box with shaking hands, sliding the familiar band onto his finger where it belonged. Then he leaned forward and kissed her, soft and sweet, while their son played contentedly between them. Mama, Dada. They broke apart, staring at Caleb in shock. Did he just... Eliza started, his first words. Dorian said in wonder. Both of us. At the same time. As if proud of his accomplishment, Caleb clapped his hands together and repeated, "Mama, da-da," with a huge grin. "Perfect timing, little man." Dorian laughed, lifting Caleb up and spinning him gently. Perfect timing. The sound of the moving truck rumbling up the driveway interrupted their celebration, but none of them minded. They had the rest of their lives to celebrate this moment, this new beginning, this family that had almost been lost but had found its way back to love. As they carried Caleb downstairs to supervise the move-in, Dorian caught sight of his reflection in the hallway mirror. The man looking back at him was different from the one who had lived in this house before. This man's eyes held peace instead of ambition, love instead of fear, presence instead of restless energy. This man was exactly who he was meant to be. "Ready to start our new life?" Eliza asked, adjusting Caleb in her arms as the movers began bringing in boxes. Dorian looked around the house that would now truly be their home, then at his wife and son, his family, his heart, his everything. "I've been ready my whole life," he said. "I just needed you to show me the way." And as the afternoon sun streamed through the windows of their home, painting everything in golden light, the Blake family began writing the next chapter of their story, one filled with love, laughter, and the unshakable knowledge that they would never take each other for granted again. 2 years later, the sound of tiny feet running across hardwood floors filled the Bellevue house as 2.5-year-old Caleb raced toward the front door, his dark hair bouncing with each determined step. "Daddy, Daddy, home," he announced to anyone within earshot, which in this case was his very pregnant mother, who was attempting to fold laundry while keeping one eye on their energetic toddler. Eliza smiled, her hand resting on her 8-month belly where their daughter, they'd decided to name her Grace, was apparently practicing gymnastics. The second pregnancy had been planned, wanted, celebrated, so different from the fear and uncertainty that had surrounded Caleb's arrival. "Yes, baby," she called after her son. "Daddy's home from his trip." Dorian had been in Portland for 2 days, his longest business trip since their remarriage 18 months ago. Blake International's new family-first policies meant that overnight trips were rare, weekend travel was prohibited, and every absence was carefully planned around family schedules. The front door opened, and Dorian's voice filled the entryway. "Where's my boy?" "Daddy!" Caleb launched himself at his father with the complete faith that only toddlers possessed, knowing absolutely that strong arms would catch him. Dorian scooped him up, spinning him around while Caleb giggled with pure joy. "Did you take good care of Mama while I was gone?" "Yes, I help. I fold socks," Caleb announced proudly, though his version of folding bore little resemblance to actual laundry organization. "He was very helpful," Eliza confirmed, appearing in the doorway with a basket of tiny clothes. At 32, she glowed with the particular beauty of a woman who was deeply loved and completely happy. "Though I think we'll need to refold those socks." Dorian set Caleb down and immediately moved to his wife, pulling her into a careful embrace that accommodated her pregnant belly. "How are you feeling? Any contractions? Did she kick much today?" "She's been active," Eliza laughed, leaning into his warmth. "I think she missed your voice. She always settles down when you read to her." It had become their nightly ritual, Dorian reading children's stories aloud, one hand on Eliza's belly, Caleb curled up between them. Sometimes he read business journals to his unborn daughter, explaining market trends in the same gentle tone he used for fairy tales. "Book, book," Caleb demanded, tugging on Dorian's sleeve. "Read dinosaur book." "After dinner, buddy," Dorian promised, then looked at Eliza with concern. "You look tired. How much did you do today?" "I told you to rest. I'm pregnant, not made of glass," Eliza interrupted with fond exasperation. "Besides, someone had to supervise the nursery painting." Dorian's eyes widened. "The painters came today? But I wanted to—" "You wanted to paint your daughter's nursery yourself, I know. That's why I had them wait. The primer is done, but the actual painting is all yours." She smiled at his relieved expression. "I know how important these moments are to you now. They were important. Every milestone, every first, every small moment that had once seemed insignificant was now precious to Dorian. He'd learned that childhood happened in the accumulation of ordinary days, not just the major events. "How did the Portland meeting go?" Eliza asked as they moved toward the kitchen, Caleb running ahead to show his father the elaborate block tower he'd built that afternoon. "Successfully. The new client was impressed by our work-life balance policies. Apparently, word is spreading that Blake International is a different kind of company now." Dorian's voice carried quiet pride. They want to implement similar policies in their organization. It had been a gradual transformation, but Blake International had become a model for family-forward business practices. Employee satisfaction was at an all-time high, productivity had increased, and their reputation for innovation extended beyond logistics into corporate culture. The company was more successful than ever, though success was now measured differently in the Blake household. "And you turned down the Tokyo expansion again?" Eliza asked, beginning to prepare Caleb's dinner. "I did." Dorian lifted his son onto his shoulders so Caleb could reach the light switch he'd been pointing at. "Some opportunities aren't worth the cost. Besides, we have everything we need right here." "But it was a huge opportunity." "Eliza." Dorian's voice was gentle but firm. 2 years ago I would have jumped at that expansion without thinking twice. I would have convinced myself that more success meant a better life for my family, while actually spending less time with the people who make life worth living. He reached over to touch her belly. "I know what matters now." As if summoned by her parents' conversation, Grace gave a particularly strong kick that made Eliza gasp. "She's got opinions about something." Eliza laughed, rubbing the spot where their daughter's foot had connected with her ribs. "She's probably excited about meeting her big brother," Dorian said, helping Caleb down from his shoulders. "Aren't you, Caleb? Are you ready to be a big brother?" "Baby sister," Caleb announced, then very seriously added, "I teach her blocks." "I'm sure you will, buddy." As they moved through the familiar rhythms of family life, dinner preparation, toddler entertainment, the comfortable chaos of a home filled with love, Eliza found herself marveling at how completely their lives had transformed. The man who had once prioritized conference calls over bedtime stories now turned off his phone every evening at 6 o'clock. The workaholic who had missed his son's birth now scheduled his meetings around nap times and doctor's appointments. "I have something to tell you," she said suddenly as Dorian was cutting fruit for Caleb's dinner. Something in her tone made him pause, the knife hovering over an apple. "Good something or concerning something?" "Dr. Martinez called today, about the family therapy evaluation we discussed." They'd been seeing Dr. Martinez together for the past year, working through the lingering trust issues and communication patterns that had contributed to their first marriage's failure. It had been Dorian's idea. He was determined that they wouldn't repeat old mistakes. "And she says we've made remarkable progress, that our communication patterns are healthy, our conflict resolution skills are strong, and that we've successfully rebuilt trust and intimacy." Eliza's smile was radiant. "She's recommending we reduce our sessions to monthly check-ins." Relief and pride flooded Dorian's features. "We did it. We did it," Eliza confirmed. "We actually figured out how to love each other well." That evening, after Caleb had been bathed, read to, and tucked into his toddler bed, Dorian and Eliza sat on their back deck, watching the Seattle skyline twinkle in the distance. Eliza was curled against his side, his hand resting on her belly where Grace was finally still. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "Turning down all those opportunities? Choosing family over empire building?" Dorian was quiet for a long moment, considering her question with the seriousness it deserved. "I regret that it took me so long to understand what really mattered," he said finally. "I regret the time I lost, the moments I missed, the pain I caused you. But choosing family over empire? Never. Not for a single second." He shifted slightly so he could look at her face in the soft porch light. "You and Caleb and Grace, you're my empire now. You're my legacy, my greatest achievement, my most important investment. Everything else is just noise." As if in response to his words, Grace gave a gentle kick against his palm, and they both laughed softly. "She's going to be a daddy's girl," Eliza predicted. "Just like her brother. And her mother," Dorian added, pressing a kiss to Eliza's temple. "The most important girls in the world." They sat in comfortable silence, surrounded by the sounds of their neighborhood settling in for the night. In the distance they could hear the faint sound of Caleb talking to his stuffed animals, creating elaborate bedtime stories for his toys. "Dorian? When Grace is old enough, when she asks about how Daddy and Mommy fell in love again, what will you tell her?" Dorian smiled, his fingers tracing gentle patterns on her belly. "I'll tell her that sometimes people get lost, even when they love each other. I'll tell her that her daddy was so afraid of failing that he forgot how to try. But then her big brother got sick, and Mommy was brave enough to ask for help, and Daddy finally came home. And I'll tell her that love isn't about being perfect. It's about choosing each other every day, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." His voice grew soft with emotion. I'll tell her that the greatest moment of my life wasn't when I made my first million or closed my biggest deal. It was when I held her brother for the first time and realized that everything I'd been chasing meant nothing compared to the family I already had. Eliza felt tears gather in her eyes. Pregnancy hormones, she told herself, though she knew it was really just overwhelming gratitude for this second chance they'd been given. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too. All of you." As the stars appeared one by one in the darkening sky above Seattle, the Blake family settled into another peaceful night. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new opportunities to choose love over fear. But tonight, they were simply and completely home. In his crib upstairs, Caleb slept peacefully, dreaming of dinosaurs and blocks and baby sisters. In her mother's womb, Grace grew stronger each day, preparing to join a family that would never take her presence for granted. And on the back deck, two people who had lost each other and found their way back again sat wrapped in the quiet contentment of a love that had been tested and proven true. Some stories end with dramatic declarations or grand gestures, but the best love stories, the ones that last, end with ordinary Tuesday evenings filled with the extraordinary grace of choosing each other again and again in all the small and precious moments that make a life. The Blake family had learned that love wasn't a destination to reach but a daily practice to embrace. And as they faced the future together, whatever challenges and joys it might bring, they did so with the unshakable knowledge that some things are worth fighting for, worth changing for, worth coming home for. Their greatest adventure wasn't building a business empire or conquering new markets. It was this: learning how to love each other well, one ordinary, extraordinary day at a time. When life forces you to choose between career success and family happiness, which would you prioritize? Share your thoughts about balancing ambition with the people who matter most. Your stories could inspire someone facing the same difficult choice. Your participation means a lot to the channel. Please share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below letting us know what you thought. Your feedback and support mean a lot to us. Stay tuned for more exciting stories.